Hi, welcome to Getting Started with Book Marketing for Non-Marketers. My name is Elise Erickson, and I know that it takes a lot of different skills to getting a book published, from writing to getting it edited to coming up with your final copy. Lots of different skills are involved. And just like that, book marketing is a whole separate skill. That can take practice and work to acquire. So in this video, we're just going to go through some basics, some introductory questions that you can ask yourself that will help you get started with thinking through how best to market your book for you and for your book. So a little bit about me. My name is Elise Erickson, and I got my career started in publishing at Harold Ober Associates, after which I moved into advertising, which is a really fun transition. And then most recently, I just got my MBA from the University of Minnesota, where I specialized in marketing and strategy. So as we think about getting started with marketing your book, one of the first things that I would recommend is really getting to know yourself and what might work for you. I know for myself, I fall into a trap really easily of thinking, I can learn how to do all these different things. I can become someone different who likes to post every day, for example. And fundamentally, I am not somebody who's going to post every day. So I don't recommend, as you're starting your book marketing journey, that you change everything about the way that you operate online. I think that's going to become really overwhelming really quickly. So think about where you already live naturally online. Where do you already interact with people? Where do you prefer to post or engage with content? And think about how you can start to leverage those places to begin marketing your book. So, for example, I would also think about, like, if you don't like to make videos, you don't really want to have your face online, TikTok might not be the best fit for you, which is important to know and really good to know, especially if you're someone who, for example, writes YA, and where TikTok is maybe more of a better brand fit. And so then you can sort of think through, okay, you don't necessarily like posting your face online, but how else can you create content on TikTok that will work for you and for your book, reach the audience that you're trying to reach, but not overwhelm yourself and become too much too quickly. So part of that is also understanding what you can commit to. Are you somebody who's going to really like writing a newsletter on a frequent basis? Or do you like to post every day? Or are you somebody who maybe prefers to think through what they're going to say, who's not as comfortable just sort of shooting off a post, but wants to really think through things? Then you can start to put together an idea of what you should target for a posting schedule, for a cadence that will work for you, keep you on track and on topic to reach your goals, but also won't burn you out too quickly. So an important thing to think about with this too is, why are we posting on social media, and why are we thinking about social media and the internet as our first line when it comes to book marketing? I know probably when you started writing your book, you had dreams of signings at bookstores and meeting with fans and doing all that one-on-one stuff. And that's really great and really exciting. But a lot of that in this day and age starts online, and beginning with building relationships online. So having a platform online helps you to engage with your readers directly and, most importantly, for free. It's a location where you can interact with them about things that aren't just your book, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. It's also a great way to build community, because when we are in our writing community, we're part of a much broader ecosystem that's not just us and our readers, but also editors and illustrators and other writers and booksellers and lots of different people. And they all come at the work of book marketing, because that's important for everybody, with their own expertise and their own knowledge. And so being able to build that community through social media is going to be a great place where we can acquire knowledge and information and start to learn, especially since this is an environment that changes really, really quickly. And then additionally, it's something that helps us create a personal brand, because ideally, if you're, serious about writing, interested in writing, it's probably not going to stop with one book. And so marketing is more than just getting your first book sold. It's about making sure that there's an audience in place for your second and your third, so that you're not reinventing the wheel with your marketing every time you put out a new book. And so it's just a place to get started, to build a platform, to build an identity, to become a known entity to your readers, so that you can have your audience already built up for the next time you need to start marketing your book. So as we think about brand and talk more in depth about what is your brand and what is a personal brand when it comes to being a writer, and why does it matter? So more than just the book itself, readers are interested in the themes, ideas, and experiences that you bring to your story. So this could be a particular theme or expertise that you have that you use in your story. Look at the stuff that carries through your work to see where that might exist. It might be crafts or art that you use in one of your books, or research that you did that you're really excited about, that you love to share, a love of history, or something potentially tied into your own career that comes to play in with your work. I feel like I see a lot of lawyers, for example, who like to use elements of the law in their books, and that's always a lot of fun. And so when you can use your marketing, your social media to elaborate on these themes, it helps to draw your readers into your broader work and your personal brand, and ultimately your future work. And this is something that I think sometimes writers say, well, it's not really related to the writing, it's not really related to the book, but it's part of the reason why readers pick these up. It's part of the reason why they're interested in these stories in the first place. And so bringing in these other elements of your personality and your life, and your interests, are not only wonderful tools in terms of creating personal brand and humanizing yourself, they help you create additional content for things to post, and they create a picture of you as a full person to your readers, and helps them make an emotional connection with you. It's hard to connect emotionally with someone who maybe only talks about buy my book or posting pictures of the covers, and there's absolutely a place for that. That is also something very important to do. But we also want to make sure that if readers are going to stick around, if followers are going to stick around on our pages, that we're posting more than just that, and creating a broader sense of who we are and why we're interesting and why our work is interesting. And so this is a useful way to do that. And as we think about how to plan this and begin with this, going back to that previous slide, think about how you want to interact online. So are you someone who's very comfortable interacting casually, or do you like to plan carefully? So for example, if you're somebody who's great with interacting casually, someplace like Twitter, where you can just like repost interesting articles, share other people's posts, comment on other people's posts, might be a good fit. And you can use a lot of different types of shares and posts to do that. That's a mix of writing and anything else that you're interested or like. I see a lot of writers who post about their politics or things that they're interested in the world, and readers engage with them, and it's actually a way of also finding additional readers, even if that's not necessarily the intention that they go in with. On the other side, if you're somebody who likes to plan carefully and that kind of spontaneous commenting is not the right fit for you, you can have a newsletter where you might share to your readers tidbits of something that you learned recently that's really exciting, that you're really looking forward to putting into your next story, or sharing tools that maybe your readers can use. If you're somebody who writes, for example, like nonfiction, you have experience with early childhood education or development, you can share potentially tools for your readers with children to use, activities for them, ways for them to like think through dealing with meltdowns, for example, things like that, that will appeal to your readers with children or readers who are also interested in those same things, but in a more structured way than just, a one-off post, for example. And all of this is really fundamentally about finding your community. So when we talk about your writing community, we're talking about a lot of different types of people. We're talking about fellow writers, which would include writing groups, bloggers, professional organizations who can be really good resources, not only for making contacts, but also for learning about the ways in which marketing and algorithms and all these things are changing, because they're changing all the time. We're also talking about your collaborators. If you have professionals that you work with to edit your book, if you are a children's book author and you work with illustrators, we're talking about reviewers. We're of course talking about our readers who we're trying to find, and then also booksellers, your local indie bookstore, are all a part of your writing community. And it's really great, as I mentioned, to network with these folks because at least in my experience, it's a really useful way to learn about what's going on in the industry, to understand the forces that might impact the way that your book is selling, the way that you need to market, the way that you need to maybe shift your strategies. They can also help to promote your work. They can offer great feedback. They can just be a great source of friendships. But they are all folks who have their finger on the pulse of what readers are looking for and how to best reach them. And so while a lot of the strategies that I'm talking about are also evergreen, there are aspects that have to do with the way that books are sold that change constantly. And so keeping an eye out on your broader community instead of just your readers is going to be a great way of keeping track of all of that. And on the flip side, in order to maintain that community, in order to maintain a healthy ecosystem of writing, it's also going to be really important that you give back by promoting other writers' work, other collaborators' work, celebrating other people's wins, sharing what you're learning with other writers, sharing advice and recommendations. And the best thing about all of this is that not only does it create goodwill for you in the community, not only is it good for you in terms of building a community, but readers really like this stuff. And so this can also become great marketing. The more that readers see you as a resource, not only for your own books and what you have coming out as well, but if you're somebody who, I'll use a previous example, writes children's books about STEM, lots of parents are interested in that. And you can become someone whose newsletter they read or whose posts they like to see because you have your own books that they like, but also you might know what else is going on and what else is coming out that they want to know about. And if you can do a good job sharing and lifting up others, you can make sure that your readers are looking at your posts, interested in what you have to say. And then when you have another book ready to come out, they will continue opening. They'll still be opening your email blast. They'll still be looking at your posts, and you'll have that audience ready to go. Whereas if you're somebody who potentially only thinks about the readers, only thinks about your own book, and only posts those pictures of your cover of your own book, your own reviews, it is more likely that people will burn out a little bit on that type of content and not be there still when your next book is ready to come around. So how do we find our readers, and how do we think about our audiences as we're thinking about marketing to our readers? So there's a lot of questions that we can ask ourselves to sort of think about our audience. But I think the first one, as we're talking about what platform we sit on and the value that our readers have to us, is it's important to consider who owns your audience even before you begin to collect that audience. So as I mentioned, being on a platform and marketing through online platforms, it does carry a certain amount of risk when those platforms change their algorithm. I have seen so many cycles of Amazon changing the way that they pay their writers, changing the way that they market to their readers. And every time something changes, it's immensely disruptive for the authors who rely on Amazon, rely on these websites for their bread and butter. And so one way of mitigating that risk is to have your own list, have your own audience, and not just rely on the people who follow you online. So how do you gather a list of readers? There's some great ways of doing this that I've seen done largely by having a website and collecting email addresses through your website. So make sure that in your book you have a link to find out more on your website. And then once you get to your website, I have found it to be really valuable, and I've seen this done. I've contributed my email to these campaigns, but I love it personally when authors have some element about their book that I can get more of on their website. So, for example, with romance novels, this often happens where you finish the book, you love the book, it's been so charming, and then there's a little author's note at the very end saying, if you want to hear more about this couple, there's an extra epilogue available on my website, and a link that clicks right through it. And in order to get that epilogue, you give your email. And I love these personally. As a reader, I love these. And so that's a great way to have readers give you their email addresses so that you can then remarket to them. Additionally, with something like that, you know that they love the story. If I didn't love the story, I would not be interested in getting that extra epilogue. So it's helpful because you know that they're interested. You know that they're interested. You know that they're interested in hearing more from you. And you can provide them with a little bit of extra content in exchange for their email address, which you can then use to market them to your next book. So say, for example, you're not a romance writer, you don't have the epilogue to give them. There are still things that you can do if you are writing a different genre or writing something else. So again, I'll go back to an earlier example. If you're somebody who has experience with childhood education, there are lists or information that you can put together that your readers might be interested in. I saw one recently that I really appreciated that was about learning disabilities and resources that parents can have for learning disabilities. And this was tied into the story. It was relevant to the story. And there were a ton of resources that I'd never heard of. And that if someone is reading this book for the first time, they think, oh, I didn't know about this. This might be really useful to me. That's the kind of thing that you could still use for a tool like this, even if something like the extra epilogue and an additional piece of writing, a continuation of the story, is not quite the right fit for you. So this is where we draw in some of these questions that we've already answered about our brand to tie this into what else we can offer our readers that will encourage them to give their email so that ultimately we can make sure that no matter what happens with Twitter, with Amazon, with any of these social media sites, if worst comes to worst, you still have a list of readers that you own, and you can make sure that news about new books, news about all of these resources still gets out to them. If you are brand new, if you have never put out a book before, I would still recommend having a list like this up on your website. You might think, well, I don't have anything to offer, but there are still ways of getting your writing out there as you're thinking about the lead up to your first launch. So I've seen resources on Twitter, especially, that I love. Resources is probably a strong word. There are challenges, I'll call it, on Twitter that I've seen that I really love. For example, where you post your work in progress, post a piece of your writing that you're really proud of, or like, again, in the romance novel community, posting like a kiss between your characters that you really like. And I have, again, personally gone onto those authors' websites, seen the book isn't out yet, they don't have any book out yet, but they have a list, and I'll get notified when that section, that book that I really loved, I love the 3 sentences that they gave me, comes out. And so even something little like that can help you build your list, just get a jump start even before the book is launched. So then, as we think about our readers, This first bullet might seem really obvious, but when we think about where to reach them, this is important. So who is actually doing the buying? For example, with a children's book, it's important to appeal to children, but the person with the money is the parent. And so it's more important for you to be where parents are than it is for you to be where the children are, because the parents are the ones who will be actually acquiring the book. Think about what the expectations of your readers are. And this changes by genre. So this is where it's valuable to maybe learn from experienced authors in your genre. Do they have an expectation of access to the author? Do they want to be able to chat with you online? Do they have a preferred method of purchase? Are they, do these books tend to sell well in physical copy, or is it a necessity that you have an ebook ready to go? Because that also might change how you build your relationships with local bookstores, for example. Think about any needs or preferences that they have. So in genre fiction, we love specific tropes, we love specific themes, we love specific trends. And it is really useful to go through your book and just see where those pop up in your story. Are you somebody who has the example that I used before, a children's book about STEM? That's important, and that's something that people search for. So highlight that as a trait that's valuable. If you have a couple in your story and it's a grumpy sunshine, make sure that you are highlighting that in your marketing and using that as a way to promote it, so that when readers see your marketing, see your books, they know what they're in for. And there are some genres, especially, where that's very, very important. And this is another place where having a list of readers and having a newsletter list especially is really valuable, because another great way to find out about your readers is just to ask them. I love using newsletters for polls as a way to find out what readers are looking for, what they're interested in, what drew them to you in the first place. Those readers that respond, I think, are especially valuable, because you know that they're opening up that newsletter and reading it. And then finally, if you're somebody who writes in multiple genres, it's really important to know where your readers overlap and where they don't. And where they don't, it's really valuable to think about your marketing very differently and keep those spaces separate, so that you don't confuse and lose readers and followers as you begin to post, as you begin to build your audiences. One more thing that I don't think I have on the slide that I really like is being able to point, when you think about themes in your book, being able to point to comparative titles, even non-books, as a resource or way of explaining your story, explaining your book to potential readers. So for example, I love family dramas. So a book that talks about itself being similar to Succession, for example, would be a big green flag for me. So it doesn't have to be a book. Think about stuff that's going on in pop culture that has similar feelings or vibes to what you're writing. And think about that, using that in your marketing to your readers, and how you describe your book as a way of communicating your voice, communicating the feeling, communicating your brand more broadly to your readership. We've already talked about this a little bit, but once you have all this stuff down, you know who your reader is, you know where you want to go in terms of posting a schedule and all that stuff. What do you actually talk about? There's lots of things that you can talk about. Your own new releases is obviously the most important. Every time you have a new release, I would recommend creating a schedule going, 1 to 3 months ahead of the actual release, to start teasing it, telling people about it, posting little blurbs, posting, snippets of illustration to start to get people excited and interested, even ahead of that actual launch. But if you don't have a launch coming up, or in those off times when you want to give your readers a little bit of a break, post about books that you love, post about news or related to your brand or other topics of interest. Post your own resources, things that have helped you, things that you're interested in, your own guides related to your work. Like I mentioned, gathering info from your readers, taking polls, trying to better understand their own habits and and their own activities. And then also be sure to post news from your collaborators. If you have an illustrator that you're working with that you really enjoy working with, tell about what else they're doing, give other news, spread some of that marketing love around, which also helps to create goodwill in the community and is also really interesting, I think, to readers as well, who, in my experience, people are just interested in publishing and the process of that. And everybody has a book, but not that many people actually write their books. So learning about what goes on behind the scenes is always, I think, a fun thing. And when it comes to cadence and how frequently you talk about this, frequent communication is great if you can do it. But the ideal cadence is the cadence that works for you. So pay attention to your drop-off rates, your unsubscribe rates. But ultimately I think it's most important to create a cadence of posting, a cadence of newsletters that doesn't burn you out, that allows you to stay in your readers' minds without being overwhelming. So that might be once a month, that might be every 3 months, that might be every 2 weeks, that might be every week. I think every week is a little frequent. That is not necessarily what I would go with, but that is definitely a mileage may vary depending on your genre, your experience, and what you do. So there's a little bit of trial and error there, definitely. And finally, the last big piece is, what about ads? We've been talking a lot about free marketing, but how do we think about paid advertising? So I would say that ads are an important support, but they're not a replacement for these free activities that we're talking about. So the reason why we really value paid ads are that they help to make sure that your books are getting in front of people's eyes. Ultimately, sites like Twitter, sites like Facebook, all of these places, they exist because of paid advertisements. And so those companies will tend to prioritize paid advertisers in terms of who shows up on people's news feeds. So because of that, it can really help you cut through the noise of shifting algorithms, help you get in front of other people who are really working hard on getting those organic views, those organic clicks, and can help cut through that a little bit. It can also really help you learn more about your audiences. Part of these ad campaigns is getting access to your own advertising data in a way that you don't always have when you're just someone posting as an individual. And so that can be really valuable in terms of seeing, okay, who's clicking on these keywords instead of those keywords, what's working, what isn't, and refining from there. So when you think about things like that, you can think about websites like Google, Amazon, Instagram. BookBub is another place that can be really interesting. It's tricky to get onto BookBub. It's a place for discount book deals. And my understanding is that it tends to work very, very well if you can get it, but it can be tricky to get. So I would tend to focus more on Google and Amazon, especially. Google because they have all of the data, and they tend to have a really robust reporting system. And Amazon because that is, we're past quickly becoming, and it is the place for buying books. So those two are where I would start. But with that said, I have certainly purchased a lot of books through Instagram. This is another place where knowing your audience is critical. So I would say, as you're thinking about getting started with paid ads, it's really important to be effective with your ad dollars. And what that means to me is, don't dive in to paid ads as the first thing that you do. Do all your homework first. And that means knowing all the details about the things that we talked about prior to this ad section. Know about yourself, your brand, your own audience. Be strategic about that platform that you start on. And research that platform before you get started. And so when I say research, I mean, look at what other people in your community are doing, understand why, ask questions, and look at, for all of these platforms, there's a ton of information about advertising on them. I would look at resources online about that and how their algorithm works and how the advertising works. And I would look very specifically at recent resources within the last year specifically, because what I have found is that a lot of these platforms, their way that they operate, the way that they advertise, their algorithm, even for advertisers, can change quickly. And so make sure that as you're thinking about your strategy with this, that you're looking at the most recent stuff. And I would beware of resources and tutorials that cost money. I have seen a lot of trends with that in recent years, lots of workshops and courses that you can buy. And some of them I'm sure are really great. I but I think that they can add up very, very quickly. And there are always free resources out there that are useful places to start that let you get a jump start. So I would not put money up front first thing. And then ultimately, when you decide how you want to move forward, when you decide, for example, that you're going to start on Amazon, I would start relatively small. Again, I've heard of authors who spend $2,000 a day on their advertising, and they say that they make that back, and more. And I'm sure that that's true, but that is not likely to be your experience. So start with what you can afford to lose, start small, and measure and refine, and then do it again. And so treat your paid advertising dollars as a learning experience, as an experiment, as a way to find out more about your readers, so that it can be a part of this broader ecosystem, but it's not a replacement for the ecosystem. And I think using those strategies, you'll help to build a much more stable, much more sustainable marketing strategy.